Life has a way of writing stories we never planned. The chapters turn with twists we didn't expect, moments we never saw coming, and pain we never asked for. You may be in a season right now where nothing makes sense. You've prayed, but the heavens seem silent. You've hoped, but your dreams feel out of reach. You've tried, but the weight of life keeps pressing you down. And you wonder, where is God in all of this? But hear me today. God has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned your story. He is the author, the one who holds the pen. And when God writes a story, he never wastes a single page. Look at Joseph, thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused, locked in a prison. His story looked like failure, but God was writing a masterpiece. What seemed like defeat was setting him up for destiny. The very chains that bound him were the chains that led him to the palace. The suffering he endured was the very thing God used to elevate him. You see, we judge life by the chapter we're in, but God sees the whole book. We look at the storm, but God sees the rainbow after it. We focus on the cross, but God sees the empty tomb. Maybe right now you feel like Job. Everything you built is crumbling. The people you trusted have walked away. The prayers you've prayed feel unanswered. But Job's story wasn't over when he was sitting in the ashes. The same God who allowed the test also brought restoration. He gave Job twice as much as he had before. That's the God you serve, the God who restores, the God who redeems, the God who takes what the enemy meant for evil and turns it for good. Don't lose hope in the middle of the storm. The pain you feel today is not the end of your story. God is still working. The pages are still turning. The best chapters are still ahead. Trust him when it doesn't make sense. Trust him when the nights are long and the tears won't stop. Trust him when you can't see the way forward. Because one day you will look back and realize every setback was a setup. Every delay was divine. Every tear had a purpose. God is not finished with you. He's still writing. And when he writes the story, it always ends in victory. Every story has an author. Every masterpiece begins in the mind of a creator before it takes shape on the page. Your life is no different. The struggles, the victories, the unexpected twists, they are not random. They are not mistakes. They are the work of a divine author who sees the beginning, the middle, and the end all at once. You may feel like the plot of your life is unraveling, like the pages are filled with pain and uncertainty. But God has not lost control of your story. He is still writing. Think about a novel. The characters don't always know what's coming next. They don't see how one chapter connects to the next. They don't understand why they must go through hardship before they reach the resolution, but the author does. The author sees the full picture, weaving every moment together to create a story worth telling. God is the author of your life, and he never writes a meaningless chapter. There are moments when it feels like the ink has run dry, like nothing is happening, like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. But silence does not mean absence. When a writer is working on their greatest masterpiece, there are long stretches where the story is unfolding behind the scenes, beyond what the characters can see. In the same way, God is working in ways you don't yet understand. What feels like delay is actually preparation. What seems like confusion is the setup for clarity. Look at the lives of those who came before us. Moses didn't know that his years in the wilderness were preparing him to lead a nation. Esther didn't realize that being taken from her home was positioning her to save her people. David didn't see that his time as a shepherd was training him to be king. They didn't know. They couldn't see. But the author did, and when the time was right, every chapter made sense. Your life is no accident. Your pain is not wasted. God is crafting something greater than you can imagine. The story isn't over. The best is yet to come. Trust Him. Keep turning the pages. He has already written your victory. Life has a way of making us believe that where we are right now is where we will always be. When trials come, when doors close, when prayers seem unanswered, it's easy to think this is the end of the road. But what you are going through today is not the final chapter. The struggles, the disappointments, the uncertainty, they are not permanent. They are simply a part of the process. Think about a storm. When the rain is pouring, the sky is dark, and the winds are howling, it feels like it will never end. But no storm lasts forever. The clouds always break, the sun always shines again, and the things that once seemed unbearable fade into the past. Life's struggles work the same way. The hardship you are facing today is temporary, but what God is doing through it will last forever. Joseph sat in a prison cell, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery and falsely accused. If he had judged his life by that moment, he would have thought his story was over. But that prison was not his final destination. God was using every trial to prepare him for something greater. What looked like a tragedy was actually the road to triumph. One day he was a prisoner, the next he was second in command over an entire nation. If Joseph had given up in the pit or the prison, he never would have stepped into the palace. Your story is still unfolding. The pain you feel today, the uncertainty that weighs on your heart, it is not the end. God is working in ways you cannot see. He is using every trial, every delay, and every setback to shape you for the blessing that is coming. What seems like a roadblock is often a divine redirection. What looks like a breakdown is really a setup for a breakthrough. When you're in the middle of the storm, it's hard to see beyond it. But just because you can't see the way out doesn't mean God hasn't already made a way. He never leaves a story unfinished. He never abandons what He has started. The struggle you face today is not your final chapter. It is simply a turning point in the masterpiece God is writing. Keep trusting, keep believing, the best is still ahead. Life has a way of making us believe that setbacks are signs of failure. When dreams are delayed, when doors close, when betrayal stings, it's easy to think that everything is falling apart. But what if the very thing that seems like a setback is actually a setup for something greater? What if the disappointment you feel today is positioning you for a destiny you never saw coming? Joseph had dreams of greatness, dreams of standing in a place of influence. But before he ever saw that dream come to life, his world was shattered. His own brothers, the people who should have loved him, threw him into a pit. They sold him as a slave. He found himself in a foreign land, serving in a house that was not his own. Then, just as he began to rise, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. To anyone watching, it looked like Joseph's life was going in the wrong direction. It looked like failure. It looked like God had abandoned him. But what seemed like a setback was really God setting him up for something greater. If Joseph had never been thrown into the pit, he never would have been sold into slavery. If he had never been sold into slavery, he never would have ended up in Egypt. If he had never been falsely accused, and sent to prison, he never would have met the man who would later recommend him to Pharaoh. Every painful step, every unexpected turn was part of a divine setup leading him to the palace. What looked like a detour was actually the road to his destiny. Your life is no different. You may feel like you've been knocked down, like your dreams are slipping away, like the setbacks keep coming one after another, but God is not finished. What looks like rejection is often God's redirection. What feels like the end of the road is often just a turn towards something better. The very thing that seems to be holding you back could be the thing God is using to launch you forward. Don't lose heart in the process. The same God who turned Joseph's pain into purpose is the same God writing your story. The pit is not your final destination. The prison is not where your story ends. Trust that the setbacks are just setups for something greater. The palace is ahead. Keep believing, keep trusting. God's plan will not fail. We often find ourselves trapped in the moment, struggling to make sense of what's happening around us. When life takes an unexpected turn, when pain lingers longer than we imagined, when the road ahead looks uncertain, we begin to wonder if this is all there is. But what we see is only a single page, a single chapter, while God sees the entire book. He sees where the story began, and he knows exactly how it will end. A person reading a novel for the first time might get caught up in a difficult moment for the main character. They might feel the tension, the heartbreak, and the struggle, thinking, how will this ever turn around? But the author already knows. The author has already written the victory, the redemption, and the resolution. In the same way, God is not surprised by the hardships you face. He is not caught off guard by your pain, your delays, or your detours. He is weaving every moment into the masterpiece he has already designed. When Job lost everything, his family, his wealth, his health, he had no way of knowing that his story wasn't over. From his limited perspective, it felt like his world had come crashing down. But God saw beyond the ashes. He saw the restoration that was coming. Job didn't know that the same God who allowed the trial would also bring double the blessing. If Job had given up in his suffering, he would have never seen the full story unfold. Right now you may feel like you are stuck in a dark chapter, unable to see how anything good could come from it. But God is not limited by what you see. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating things you don't yet understand. The very things you see as obstacles may be the stepping stones to your greatest breakthrough. The pain you are enduring today might be the very thing that prepares you for the blessing ahead. Trust that God is still holding the pen. Even when you can't see the full picture, He has already written your victory. The story isn't over. The suffering you feel today is not wasted. God is writing something greater than you could ever imagine. And when the pages finally turn, you will see that every moment had a purpose, every delay was divine, and every struggle was leading you exactly where you were meant to be. There are moments in life when everything seems to fall apart. The things you worked for slip through your fingers. The people you trusted walk away. The prayers you've prayed for so long seem unanswered. In those moments, it's easy to feel abandoned, to wonder if God has forgotten you. But what if the loss you are experiencing is not the end of your story? What if it is only the beginning of a greater restoration? Job was a man who had everything: wealth, health, family, and honor. Then, in a series of crushing blows, he lost it all. His flocks were stolen, his servants killed, his children taken in a tragic accident, and his body afflicted with painful disease. He sat in the dust, scraping his wounds, his life reduced to ruins. His friends told him he must have done something wrong. His wife told him to curse God and die. Everything around him screamed that his story was over, but God was not finished. Job couldn't see what God was doing behind the scenes. He didn't know that his suffering was not a sign of God's absence, but a setup for restoration. He didn't realize that God was using his life as a testimony that even in his darkest hour, heaven was watching. And when the trial had passed, when Job had held on to his faith despite the pain, God restored him, not just to where he was before, but with double what he had lost. His wealth increased, his family was restored, his latter days were greater than his former days. When you face loss, when you walk through seasons of suffering, you may not understand why. You may not see how anything good could come from it, but God is a God of restoration. He does not take without giving back more. He does not allow pain without a greater purpose. The things you thought were gone forever, the dreams you thought had died, the broken places in your heart, He has the power to restore them beyond what you could imagine. The enemy wants you to believe that your loss is permanent. He wants you to think that what's been taken will never return. But the same God who restored Job is the same God who is writing your story. What looks like destruction today is setting the stage for a greater blessing. Hold on, trust in His plan. The best is yet to come. There are moments in life when nothing seems to go as planned. The doors you were sure would open remain shut. The opportunities you prayed for slip through your fingers. The path you thought would lead to your destiny suddenly disappears, leaving you lost and uncertain. It's in these moments that doubt creeps in, whispering, maybe I missed my chance. Maybe God has forgotten me. But what if the delays, the disappointments, and the detours are not setbacks at all? What if they are divine setups, guiding you to something far greater than you ever imagined? Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, raised as royalty, with every advantage life could offer. But when he killed an Egyptian in a moment of anger, his life changed in an instant. He fled into the wilderness, leaving behind everything he had known. For 40 years he lived as a shepherd in the desert, far from the power and influence he once had. To the outside world, it looked like he had fallen from greatness. It looked like he had failed. But what seemed like a detour was actually preparation. The wilderness was not a place of exile, it was a place of transformation. The same desert where Moses walked in obscurity became the training ground where God shaped him into the leader who would deliver an entire nation. How often do we see delay as denial? How often do we mistake detours for dead ends? But God's ways are higher than ours. What we call a setback, He calls a strategy. What we call wasted time, He calls preparation. The relationship that ended, the job opportunity that slipped away, the unexpected turn in your journey, these are not accidents. They are divine redirections, moving you toward the purpose He has ordained for your life. Joseph's time in prison was not wasted. David's years in the fields as a shepherd were not wasted. Esther's hidden season in the palace was not wasted. And your waiting is not wasted either. God is not delaying to punish you. He is positioning you. He is refining you, strengthening you, and preparing you for what's next. When the moment comes, when the door finally opens, you will see that every delay had a purpose. Every detour was leading you to something better. Keep trusting, keep walking. What God has planned for you is greater than anything you could ever imagine. Faith is easy when life is going as planned, when prayers are answered, when doors open, when the path ahead is clear. Trusting God feels natural, but real faith, the kind that moves mountains, the kind that brings miracles, comes when you have to trust without seeing. When the future is uncertain, when the answers don't come, when everything in you wants to give up, that is when faith is truly tested. Abraham was given a promise. God told him he would be the father of many nations, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. But years passed and nothing happened. He and his wife Sarah grew old. Human logic said it was impossible. People around them must have thought they were foolish to keep believing. But Abraham chose to trust even when he had no evidence. He believed even when the promise seemed too far gone. And at the appointed time, when all hope seemed lost, God fulfilled his word and Isaac was born. That is the essence of faith. Trusting when you cannot see. It's believing that God is working even when nothing in your life looks like it. It's standing firm when fear tells you to give up. It's walking forward when you don't know where the road leads. The Israelites stood before the Red Sea, an army behind them, trapped with no way out. From their perspective, it looked like their journey was over. But faith says, God has made a way even when I can't see it yet. And in that moment, when Moses raised his staff, the waters parted, revealing a path they never could have imagined. Your life will have Red Sea moments. Moments when everything looks impossible. Moments when you feel stuck with no way forward. Moments when fear whispers, this is the end. But faith refuses to listen. Faith declares God is still in control. He has a way I cannot see. It doesn't mean you won't feel afraid. It doesn't mean doubts won't try to creep in. But faith moves forward anyway. Faith steps out when logic says to sit still. Faith keeps trusting even when the answer hasn't come. God has never failed, and he won't start now. His plan for your life is unfolding even in the silence. Keep walking. Keep trusting. He is working behind the scenes. And at the right time, the impossible will become reality. Every great story has a turning point, a moment when everything that seems lost is restored, when the battle that looked unwinnable is suddenly won. The setbacks, the struggles, the delays, none of them are the final word. God's stories never end in defeat. They always end in victory. David was just a shepherd boy, overlooked and underestimated. No one saw him as a warrior, let alone a king. When he stood before Goliath, the world saw an impossible fight, a battle too great for a boy with a sling and 5 stones. But God saw something different. Where others saw defeat, he saw victory. With 1 stone, David brought down the giant. Not because of his own strength, but because he trusted in the power of God. What looked impossible to man was already won in God's plan. Your struggles may seem overwhelming. The mountain in front of you may feel too big, the battle too intense, but the same God who gave David victory over Goliath is the same God fighting for you. The same God who split the Red Sea for the Israelites is the same God making a way for you. The same God who raised Lazarus from the dead is the same God breathing new life into your situation. If God is in your story, it cannot end in defeat. Jesus went to the cross, beaten, mocked, and left to die. To the world, it looked like the end of his story. The enemy thought he had won. But 3 days later, what seemed like the ultimate defeat became the greatest victory in history. The grave could not hold him. Death had no power over him. And because he overcame, you too will overcome. God's promises are not empty words. When he says you are more than a conqueror, he means it. When he says he has a plan to prosper you and not to harm you, he means it. When he says he will never leave you nor forsake you, he means it. No matter what you are facing today, no matter how broken, lost, or weary you feel, your story does not end in defeat. The battle belongs to the Lord, and His victories are certain. Stand firm. Hold on to faith. The struggles of today will become the testimonies of tomorrow. Your story is still being written, and with God as the author, it always ends in victory. Your story is not over. The trials you face, the setbacks that seem insurmountable, the waiting seasons that test your patience, none of them are the end. God is still writing, still weaving every chapter into a masterpiece that you may not yet understand. What feels like a delay is often divine preparation. What seems like rejection is often redirection. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. Look at the lives of those who came before you: Joseph, Moses, David, Esther, Job. Every one of them faced moments of uncertainty, moments where it seemed like their stories were ending in failure. But in the hands of God, their suffering became purpose, their trials became triumphs, and their pain turned into testimonies. The same God who was faithful to them is the same God writing your story. Trust Him when the road is unclear. Trust Him when the battle seems unwinnable. Trust Him when the waiting is long and the answers don't come. His plans for you are greater than you can imagine. His timing is perfect. His promises are sure. And no matter what comes against you, no matter how impossible things may seem, if God is the author of your story, it cannot end in defeat. It will end in victory. Keep believing, keep trusting. The best is yet to come.